Hi, I'm Chris from CodeReviewVideos.com, and in this video we're going to cover disabling registration with FOSUserBundle. So there isn't really a way of doing this out of the box, but there are some easier ways of doing this, starting from quite a basic way through to slightly more advanced ways. And these sort of build on the last two videos in which we overrode a controller and also created an event listener. But the easiest way really is to look and just sort of disable the routes that are available for FOSUserBundle, not in resources, looking in the wrong place. Config into routing. Back in, I think it was the first video, we set up FOSUser routes, we imported them, and we've imported like an XML file full of different routes, and the idea is we want to disable this entire section. Now we can't sort of mess around with this file because, as you can see, this file lives in the vendor Friends of Symfony user bundle directory. So that means we're pulling this these routes in whenever we do a composer update or whatever on the FOSUserBundle. That file is going to get potentially overwritten, or at least it's going to get spotted as being different, and that's going to throw us, particularly later on when we come back to look at this project. But not really that. It's more, it was terrible practice to be interfering with third-party code. We don't want to do that. So there is a different way. We can go to the FOSUserBundle documentation, and at the very bottom there is a section called Advanced Routing Configuration. Now in here it lists out all those same routes, but they're in YAML format. Ideally, you would probably want to create a new routing file for your FOSUser routes and just put them in there and then just import that file. But for the purposes of demonstration, I'm just going to paste them directly into our routing YAML. And then I can go ahead and just comment out the register routes. And if we go back to our site now, hit the register route, we can see that that is now a 404. Now, that's not really ideal. I mean, it works. It's just it's not the best user experience, really. The users just think that that route no longer exists, but really we'd prefer to show them a nice page that says, you know, registration's currently disabled. Now I'm going to go ahead and re-enable those routes, and the reason why is because we're going to go ahead and override them. Before I do, I want to say in this video, I'm building on the previous two videos, so I'm not going to show like the setup of these. If you want to see how this is all set up, just watch the previous two videos, depending on which part you're most interested in. The slight variation is I've created a disabled template inside registration. This is just, it could be anything, but it's just the easiest thing I can think of. It just extends the base, so we're going to get a nice little bootstrap representation of this page, and all it should say is registration is currently disabled, if indeed registration is currently disabled. And the way that we're going to do that is using a feature toggle. So we're going to go in here and we're just going to say registration enabled, and we'll set that to false, and we probably want to put that into our parameters YAML dist as well, and that just means anyone that's going to get this project, so download this project and maybe work in collaboration with you, when they first install it, it's going to make sure that that parameter is added to their parameters YAML too. But I will show you when we go into the controller or look at this in any way, we're going to check whether that even exists anyway. So the first way that we're going to look at this in a more advanced capacity is to look at overriding the registration controller. The reason I'm overriding the registration controller is if we go back to our routing and we look at the FOSUser register or registration routes, we can see in here the FOSUser registration register route really calls the registration controller and the register action. So inside our controller that we're overriding, it's the registration controller, that's that part, and then we need a register action, that's that part. So if we go in, I've already defined that, and as in the previous video, it's purely for the speed really, otherwise you're going to be sat watching the same stuff over and over. We can see that I'm just, if nothing happens in this instance, we just default back to the register action, which is fine. So what we really want to do though is put this check in. So we're going to say if this container has parameter, and then we want to check for registration enabled. So if that parameter exists, then we want to do some stuff. If not, then it's just going to fail back to the register action. So this logic won't even take place. And then we're going to say if this get parameter, notice this get parameter, not this container get parameter. Both are accurate, but for the purposes of simplicity, I suppose, Symfony has included a convenience method to make that more accessible. Anyway, this get parameter is false. Sorry, this get parameter registration enabled is false. Then in this case, we want to return this render and then that disabled view. So let's just check if that works. We are set, as I recall, parameters is set to registration enabled false. If we hit that, now we should see registration is currently disabled. And then if we change this back up to true, refresh this, we should see the registration form. In my opinion, a more preferable way to do this would be using an event listener. I've gone ahead and created an event listener called registration root listener, and this is literally just a copy paste from the FOSUser security login listener that we created in the previous video. And as you can see, I'm still even checking that we're going to that root. So instead, we want to check that we're going to the register root. I'm pretty sure it's that. The way that we find that out is if we just follow the routing registration XML, and the root is FOSUser registration register. So if someone's trying to hit that root, remember we hit the prefix, so it's /register, and then this one doesn't have anything after it, so it's just a slash. That's why we're hitting this root. So in our listener, we want to check if we're hitting that root registration underscore. I must have made a mistake in there somewhere. And notice at this point, so if this root is not equal to that, then just return. We're not too bothered. We only want to interfere with this when it equals that root. But we're not able to check the parameter, so let's go ahead and fix that. We don't want that, and we don't want that. We want our services. So again, this is just a copy paste, almost identical. We're not interested in checking the root out. The user out. We're only interested in the root. So we also want to inject that parameter. So let's pass that in. So %%, and ours is registration enabled. It's nicely added in extra percentages for us. So registration enabled is currently true. It's telling us that's a Symfony plugin, so you may not see that. But we need to then pass this in. So we'll say registration enabled, and we'll alt and initialize that, alt and enter, so we don't need to do too much typing. And then so we'll say if registration enabled equals to false. In fact, no, we'll just leave it as true and just return early there, return. And then so if we get to this point, then we're saying that registration is false, registration enabled is false. So instead we're just going to redirect and back to the home page. No, in this case we want to go to our registration template, but that's probably not going to work because we can't redirect to a template. So let's instead do a little trick, I suppose. We could go into routing and define ourselves a route that's specific to this registration disabled, but we don't really want to create a controller here, as there's no point particularly just creating a controller for this action, as there's nothing really going on. So registration disabled or register disabled, let's just set that to registration disabled. I don't know why I have to do that, considering it's purely for the purposes of demonstration, but there we go. And then we're going to say, so the controller in this case, we don't actually need a controller. We're going to do a framework template, framework bundle template, which is just going to render out a template for us. It's a little bit of I don't know if it's a hack or not, but it's certainly not something that you have to do every day. And then so we don't have a top level bundle for this. It's views, registration disabled. So registration disabled, html.twig, and then instead we can just redirect back to that root. So this router interface generate, and this should work. I think, have we got that enabled? We do. Routing, don't want this one in action anymore, so let's disable that bundle completely. So that's definitely not interfering with anything. And then also we'll just drop something in here. So we'll say exit, hit this, which is fine because we shouldn't hit that because we're no longer using that. So in this case, we've hit the register, and I think we've left this as true, so maybe that's why we're still getting through. Let's just close all of those, go back to our parameters. Registration enabled was true, so we should have seen the register page. This time we get the registration disabled.